Welcome back to WaterparkRangers Let's Play Pikmin 2. Last episode we entered this new dungeon, the Bulblax Kingdom, in the Awakening Wood, and we're going to be going through the beginning portions of it this episode. Normally I would recommend, if you're doing a normal playthrough, for this dungeon, bring along a good supply of purples, maybe 15 to start off, though you're going to be finding a lot more due to the candy pot buds inside this cave. This dungeon most notably introduces the orange bulborb as a new enemy. It is one of the most dangerous enemies in the game, in my opinion. They're not as bad as spotty bullbears because they do sleep, but unless you have purples, I'd recommend generally trying to avoid them. You'll see why. I'm going to only fight them with reds just because they are tough, and reds will do a lot more damage to them because they do have more HP than your standard bulborb. Not as much as bullbears, though. So you walk past them, but without touching them, they would just wake up like that. They have a certain radius around them that if you get near enough, that's all it takes to wake them up, and that's what makes them dangerous. It means you can't just hope to sneak up on them every time and defeat them before they can get their bearings. So for fighting them, I kind of recommend throwing Pikmin at them quickly as soon as you get close, and just hoping for the best. If you have purples, it's a snap. Just make sure you're throwing the purples, not swarming them, obviously. Now, as long as we're up here, we're safe mostly from the bulborb, and this is a good position for us to try and throw Pikmin at its back from this point right here. And then I think we can damage it just like that. And maybe even defeat it if we're lucky without it killing Pikmin. I can't see its HP, so I don't know how well we're... Oh, no! It ate a few Pikmin before we got the chance to... Yeah, they're dangerous, but hey, it could have been a lot worse if we had to fight it normally. And, unfortunately, they're actually encountered somewhat frequently in lots of different dungeons from this point onwards. So they're kind of bad for that reason as well, that we're gonna keep seeing them. They don't just disappear after this dungeon, unfortunately. Oh well. And of course they have dwarf orange bulborbs to accompany them. Those are basically just the same as dwarf red bulborbs. They seem to be a bit more perceptive, but not by much, and they do have a bit more HP. And typically, by the time you're done defeating them by swarming them, they will be able to knock a few Pikmin over and knock off their flowers. So that is what makes them a bit annoying. So I do recommend going for critical hits by throwing them on top of them, just like you would do with a normal dwarf red bulborb. So that's the scoop on the orange variety. And we're going to encounter them throughout the rest of this dungeon as well. Now in this floor, it's actually very easy. This is one of those floors that's actually easier than anything in Glutton's Kitchen. Right here we have a few fiery dweevils. We encounter these in Citadel spiders, but we never actually fought them. As you can see, when you fight them, they spew fire at your Pikmin as defenses. So you might want to fight them using only reds, just to be on the safe side. Of course, if a Pikmin catches on fire, you just use a whistle to put out the fire, so nothing you didn't already know. And the Dweevil is completely invulnerable to any attack besides the one that hits the core. So in that sense, you can think of it as a really small version of the beady longlegs boss that can't step on your Pikmin. So that's one way of looking at them. And I'm not sure you've seen this before, but one thing Dweevils do is they'll try and pick up, and apparently yellows are not going to be able to reach that, even though it's at a high position. One of the things that Dweevils will do is, like breadbugs, they will try to pick up different treasures or enemy corpses they find, but they don't have any nests that they bring the stuff back to. All they do is just walk around with it and kind of use it as a shield, which can get kind of annoying, and there are a few glitches associated with it as well, and I'm not sure if we're going to run into any on this playthrough. There is a dungeon later on where there's a glitch that happens quite frequently, involving what happens when Dweevils pick things up. One thing you can try with Dweevils, which is fun, is have your captain use the knapsack ability from the White Flower Garden. And they'll actually be able to pick up your captain and walk around with him. Unfortunately, this doesn't really lead to anything special, but it's still fun to watch. And I might try that at a later point, just because it'll be fun. And that's really all there was on the second floor, so as you can see, that was definitely not as easy as Glutton's Kitchen. That's one of the tough things about this dungeon, is actually saying, is this tougher than Glutton's Kitchen or not? Because the boss here is definitely worse, and if this is your first time playing it, the boss will give you a much harder time than Glutton's Kitchen, for sure. And on this floor we have the Withering Blowhog enemy. Pretty sure you haven't seen this enemy yet. It's a blowhog, obviously, which is like the Puffy Blowhog from the first game. It's more frequently fought in this game. Usually appears underground, though, actually, never mind, it's actually quite common on the overworld as well. But, strangely enough, we haven't run into one in one of the overworld areas. There's some female sheargrubs here as well, and I'm just collecting a few, that way we could make our Poco value even again. Because remember, the Glutton's Kitchen set off our counter from being perfectly even the way I like it to be. And the reason that I only brought 5 whites into the dungeon is, number 1, there's no poison, and number 2, you get another ivory candy pop butt on this floor. And I believe this is where you find the only buried treasure in the dungeon, so this is really the only part of the dungeon that you need white Pikmin for. Although some people recommend using them as poison against some enemies, I really don't like doing that, because then you have to go and replenish your white stores again by going back into dungeons, and that's really just more trouble than it's worth. It's better to just be a skilled fighter than relying on them for poison, so I don't like doing that. Besides, it's also kind of, like, ethically, it's not really ethical. I mean, you're upright just sacrificing the Pikmin, you're not even giving them a fighting chance. So I'd prefer to let the Pikmin fight it out. That's the same reason that I never used bombs on Emperor Bulblax in the first game. Though maybe if I tried hard and got good at that strategy so I could get them to throw them at its tongue, that would be cool. And, this treasure I think has a pretty interesting name as well. And maybe there's some nectar around here. I'd like to see if there's some nectar because we have a few leaf Pikmin remaining. Yeah, I believe this one is called the Olimarnite shell, which is kind of like, the Ammonite. And yeah, the Ammonite was also that Pokemon that appeared. I believe, yeah, there's Ammonite and, Omastar from the first generation. The first gen games were pretty fun, I guess. Yellow, I mean. Because I tried to play Crystal afterwards, I couldn't really get into it. Because it didn't have the same... I don't know, when I played Yellow, it felt more classic somehow. I mean, obviously everyone says Gold, Silver, Crystal, those are like the greatest. And I know that I probably have to give it another chance, but right now I just don't feel like doing it. It feels like Yellow without the same heart that Yellow had. It's tough to say. I know that that's really a bad way of putting it, but there's no other way to say it that I can find at the moment. Oh god! Wollywog! Yeah, it's probably doing that to kill me for after what I said about Crystal not being as awesome as Yellow so far. Oh god. This is a new enemy, actually, encountered. This is the first time we've encountered it in this game. These Wollywogs are more dangerous than the yellow variety, for sure. They only appear underground. They have a lot more HP, they have a more vicious jumping range, and as a result, it's already killed a Pikmin. And it appears for the first time in this dungeon. So for that reason, this is one of the more difficult things in the Bulblax Kingdom. That enemy there, though you're going to have to get used to fighting it, because it's going to appear more frequently later on. Obviously, purple Pikmin are more recommended for fighting it, just as they're recommended for fighting just about every single enemy we've encountered thus far. Besides fiery Bulblaxes, for the obvious reason that you can't fight them while they're on fire. That fire will not go out with purples. It just doesn't work that way. Oh, and strangely enough, there are also electric cords in here. Of course, we've already seen these in the Glutton's Kitchen, so they're not new. And we have, besides the honey wisps that appeared on this floor, we have a few violet candy pop buds. So there are some elements of rest floors here, like the getting rare Pikmin, the honey wisps for nectar. But due to the fact that there are electric cords and the Wollywog around, it's not safe to say that this is anything close to a rest floor. And we have anode beetles as well, but they're not really any trouble. Though if you're careless around them, they can kill a lot of Pikmin, so just keep that in mind. And there was an iridescent glint beetle there as well. Glint beetles underground usually hold treasures. Of course, your treasure gauge will let you know whether or not it has a treasure. The good thing about iridescent glint beetles that hold treasures is, unlike your standard glint beetle / flint beetle, if you fail to get them before they go underground, they'll just warp to another place on the same floor. So it's not like you have to do the dungeon again or reset to get their treasure. You just have to explore a little bit until you uncover them again. So I hope that cleared up any fears that you might have had about this enemy's quirky patterns. And just like that, I think we have everything that we really need here, now that I'm pulling the purples we have. The purples are great against the enemies and boss in this dungeon. Of course, all we really have to do is escort them safely through, since we're not going to be using them for combat. And I think we're already halfway through the dungeon, so next episode we're probably going to finish this place off. It's not very long. Or we might at least get to the final floor, because that one is a little bit longer. And I guess I'll see you next episode. See you then, in the Bulblax Kingdom. Level 5.